Hi movie fans, in this installment we'll be looking at 3,000 Years of Longing. Stick around to the end for our conclusion and be aware of spoilers ahead. Let's do this. Alethea tells us in narration that she is happy and alone by choice. She is a scholar, and she studies stories looking for similarities across cultures, like Joseph Campbell, but 80 years later. Despite her education, she thinks China is a strange land. Her CGI plane lands in an unknown CGI destination. She is there to meet people in her field of study. A character forcefully tries to get her to go with him for
the mysteries of Istanbul.
He soon walks off and vanishes into thin air when Alethea's contacts call for her. She asks the professor in the van if he saw the little fellow. She goes on to describe him and says he was hot to the touch and musky. The professor jokes that he might have been a Djinn, going on to say some people need to believe in these things when Alethea challenges him. In the hotel, Alethea has been given the Agatha Christie room. In the conference, the professor is talking about how nature was described through stories and myths by the ancients. As Alethea is talking, she notices an apparition at the back of the theater. She tries to shake it off, but as she continues, it gets closer and closer until it is sitting in the front row. She nervously goes on to say how the gods are replaced with science and reduced to metaphor. The apparition now shouts. Alethea slowly regains consciousness and her bearings as you do. As she is helped from the stage, she gets a round of applause and holds her thumb up. The professor suggests she sees a doctor, but when she says it's fine, he asks, "What was that all about?" She says that occasionally her imagination plays tricks on her and she needs to be on her toes and to pay it no mind. Alethea goes gift shopping in the local bazaar with the professor. She finds a glass bottle that she likes despite its imperfections. When she's back in her hotel room, she starts cleaning the bottle with her toothbrush. All of a sudden the stopper pops out and smoke starts pouring into the room and the room adjacent. She slowly walks into the bedroom, not believing what she can see. She tries to make it disappear as if it was one of her turns. This does not work and she gets to grips with the fact there is a massive dude in her hotel room. It quickly learns how to speak English from the television and explains that it is a Djinn and asks her what she wants to wish for, what's her heart's desire. She says to hold up a bit. It asks her to tell it about herself, which she is more than happy to do, and also decides to tell it a secret. She talks about when she was at school and how she was a loner. She had an imaginary friend called Enzo who would be there for her. He would tell her stories in the language that only they knew. He would disappear when she had a headache, but be there when she couldn't move for asthma. She thought he might disappear for good, so she wrote down everything she could about him, trying to make him real. The more she did it, the more silly she felt, and eventually burned the book, which did make him disappear. The Djinn tells her that it is there for real. There's a knock at the door. It is room service. When the pushy man has left, she puts a do not disturb sign on the door. The Djinn has made himself a more practical size and brings a tray of food to Alethea. Alethea asks how he got trapped in a bottle. He says this is his third time because he has a fondness of talking to women. He goes on to say how the first of them was the Queen of Sheba. He says he was the Queen of Sheba's confidant. He wanted more, but goes on to say that Solomon cock-blocked him. He said Solomon came to woo her. He played music for her, and despite it being shit for today's standards, it was probably pretty amazing back then. Probably. The Djinn tried to persuade her not to join with Solomon. She set seemingly impossible tasks for Solomon to complete, and when he managed to complete them, she was stunned and gave herself to him. The Djinn was peeping at them getting it on, and as it so happens, Solomon has powerful magic, so he uses his magical powers to trap the peeping Tom in a brass bottle. Solomon tosses the bottle out of the window, and an eagle catches the bottle, then flies over the Red Sea and drops it to the bottom. Despite being stuck in the bottle, he said he knew the Queen of Sheba made no plea for him. Oh, okay, I get it. When he says he was incarcerated because he has a fondness for conversing with women, what he meant to say was because he was peeping on a king and queen getting it on. Quite a big difference there, Djinn buddy. Anyway, he goes on to say how 2,000 years in a bottle is not all it's cracked up to be, but he eventually tricked himself by praying to be left in the bottle. Alethea goes on to say that she is content in her life and has everything she needs. The Djinn asks about her ex-husband. She goes on to say how they knew each other from their youth and how they got married young. In a photo album, she has a pregnancy strip and a sonogram of a fetus with the first and last image of Enzo written beneath it. I thought she said she was single by choice. She says her ex is in Hackney with his new lady. She reminisces about how one day, while in a taxi, she happened to catch him with another woman. The Djinn says perhaps you could wish for him back. to which she says,
Oh, no.
She says it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, not sure if she means the dead baby or leaving her husband, but she felt a sense of freedom. The Djinn goes on to tell her that we all have desires, no matter how deep they are hidden. She goes on to say she knows the stories about trickster Djinn and how they try to manipulate people to their own ends. The peeping Tom goes on to profess his innocence and how he is honorable.
I am not one of them.
She goes on to tell him a story about wishing and how all stories about wishing turn out to be cautionary tales. He says don't worry about it. This is our story, and we can avoid all traps. What would happen if I didn't make a wish, she says. Upon hearing this, the Djinn expands in size and hits the ceiling, then manages to control himself back to his previous size. He then says, let me tell you about my next incarceration. What's it going to be this time? Shoplifting. The Djinn says he will never know how his bottle got from the bottom of the Red Sea to a palace in Constantinople, but he does continue to tell her a story about how he fancies his bottle got into the hands of a young girl. While the girl is cleaning the bottle, she knocks the top off and out pops the Djinn. He tells her he means no harm and that he's there to grant her 3 wishes. The girl is deeply in love with Mustafa, son of Suleiman the Magnificent. Her wish is to find favor with Mustafa. The Djinn says if he knew what was going to happen, he would have talked her out of it. Instead, he created oils of enchantment for the girl to ensnare Mustafa. He has her hide the bottle so nobody can find it. He then planted the idea of her into Mustafa's mind. He calls for her and they meet. Easy. In the meantime, the Djinn spent his time in the palace exploring the place and the people. Amongst the people, he saw Hurrem, the laughing one. She was the Sultan's favorite slave. The Sultan only had eyes for her, and she sought to protect the throne for her own sons over Mustafa. She had spies watch over the prince. The Djinn became worried that his Gultan might get caught in this web. He says that he tried to warn her, but Gultan tells him that it is her heart's desire that she becomes pregnant with Mustafa's child and for him to get it done. Personally, that seems like a waste of a wish, but there you go. Hurrem fuels rumors that the military wants to take over and put Mustafa on the throne. Suleiman has been left with a choice that will break his heart. In the harem, Gultan was starting to make it known that she was pregnant and starts acting out. Mustafa goes to visit his father to reassure him, but the plot against him has moved along and his father's mutes strangle him to death. He is unable to call his bodyguards. The Djinn goes to warn Gultan, telling her that assassins are after her and she needs to make a wish to save herself and ultimately for him to escape the bottle. She says Mustafa will save her, but he tells her Mustafa is already dead and all who love him are dead. As she is trying to escape, the assassins capture her. The Djinn tries to save her, but he meets his magical match who stops him from saving her. She is thrown from the side of the palace into the sea, and when he dives to save her, she is already dead. She made no wish to save herself or the Djinn. Alethea notes that the girl was doomed by her wishes, and that the Djinn needs somebody to complete the wishes for him to be free. He was destined to walk the palace invisible to everyone, trying every way he could to alert people to the bottle hiding under the flagstone where Gultan hid it. He goes on to say that in 1620, 100 years later, hope came in the shape of a boy with a sword. He says that somehow the boy is able to sense him and he is able to draw him to the stone. The boy takes all of about 5 seconds to find the stone and try to lift it. As he and his brother, who are both in line to the throne, pry the stone loose, their mother comes and takes them away. The Djinn tries to draw him back to the stone, but at the age of 11 he becomes Sultan and harder to reach. At the age of 20, the Sultan goes to war and recklessly risks his own life, leaving the Djinn with little hope. He goes on to say, back in Istanbul, the Sultan's mother needs to protect the throne. The younger brother must produce a male heir to the throne. His mother locks him in a sable-lined room filled with concubines whom he must mate with. The son thinks, the more flesh the more pleasure, and has such ladies brought to his fur-lined cage. The Djinn says his fate turns on this fetish. Murad IV conquers his enemies and returns to his palace. War has truly rotted his soul. The Djinn is determined to draw him back to the stone. Alethea asks if the Djinn was concerned if a wish was evil, to which he says,
Not if it meant my freedom.
Djinn goes on to say that Murad thinks he's invincible and that he must get rid of all rivals. Murad takes his sword to his brother's harem. Their mother says that Ibrahim is just a baby and could never rule. She now has to distract Murad from his bloodlust with other gratifications. Her first idea is to have him perpetually drunk. Her next idea is to have the best storytellers perform before him. If they weren't very good and didn't convince him, he would kill them. There is only one storyteller that can hold his attention. He was Murad's only friend, and that friendship eventually turned to love. The Djinn liked to listen in, unsurprisingly with his track record, as he loved the stories too. When the old man dies, Murad is overwhelmed with grief, and the Djinn uses this as an opportunity to get him to the hidden bottle, but he's too weak to even open the door and then drinks himself to death. The Djinn goes on to say how he was trapped and lonely and nobody could hear his voice. He says you can't imagine. Alethea says,
No, actually, I can.
The Djinn goes on to say that if she does not make a wish, he will be trapped in this world of loneliness. Ibrahim is reluctantly made sultan. He puts his favorite concubine, Sugar Lump, in charge of Damascus. Sugar Lump is free to roam the palace and finds the room with the hidden bottle in it. Sugar Lump decides to take a bath in the filthy room and slips on her backside, which cracks the stone. She finds the bottle and activates the Djinn. He, in a moment of desperation, begs her to make a wish, any wish. She says she wants nothing to do with the devious Djinn and wishes for him to be back in his bottle at the bottom of the Bosphorus. How she knew that that's where he came from, who knows? The Djinn goes on to ask Alethea to make 3 wishes. Alethea does not want to, and after some goading makes 3 simple wishes. I wish your headache was gone. I wish I had a sip of this and 1 more of the sweets. The Djinn says he was imprisoned by Solomon for his heart's desire, therefore he must grant the wisher their heart's desire to get released. Alethea, in desperation, says I'm beginning to wish.
We never met.
The bottle smashes and the Djinn freaks out. She says you've done that before. He said he was trapped here by a genius.
Who was it this time?
He says he was trapped in this bottle by Zafir. Zafir was married to an older rich merchant with 2 older wives, who did not talk to her. She had neither etiquette nor learning and grew to know great beauty. She was angry but did not know why. Djinn's bottle came to her as a love token after being found inside a fish. She manages to pry open the bottle and understood that the Djinn was desperate to escape. She showed him all the incredible inventions she made that would have made her as famous as Da Vinci. She was a skilled artist but with no audience. She said she wants to acquire all knowledge that is useful, beautiful, and true, and it delighted the Djinn to fulfill this wish. He goes on to say that he taught her history, philosophy, and astronomy, giving no reason why he didn't just magic the knowledge in her head. He devised a way for them to hide her books and scrolls in her colored bottles. He goes on to say that he lost his heart to her. She began to rebel against her husband. He goes on to imply that he has made love with her, and because of this the old man became even more obsessed with her. He said when the old man would come for her he would go on a journey in the skies and the oceans, so no more peeping then. Alethea asks why Zafir didn't wish to become free. The Djinn goes on to say she invented a formula that explains the appearance of the universe but was missing one piece. For her second wish, the Djinn taught her to dream awake like they do. This allowed her to complete her theories on modern physics. He goes on to explain how he fell in love with her and how she fell pregnant with their child. He wished she would not use her final wish so that he would always be bound to her. He tried to stop her from making her final wish. She accused him of trapping her as her husband did. To atone, he put himself into another bottle so she would have power over him. Just as he was going into the bottle, she wished that she would forget she ever met him. Of course, this happens instantly and does not take any book learning, so now she has completely forgotten him. Alethea now says that she has a wish for him. She says that she is here to love him and she wishes for him to love her in return. He says you want Lovecraft. She says I want it all. The longing and the love you had for Sheba and Zafir. They get on with shaking of the sheets immediately. She wakes up in her hotel bed seemingly alone. She runs a bath and says, will you come back to London with me? It will be better if you are there. At the airport, Alethea is pulled aside and put through the scanner. Somehow the scanner can see she has glass in her pocket, and airport security insist on it going through the x-ray machine. Alethea is very much against this, but it goes through anyway, and she makes her way to her plane. Alethea gets home to her place in London and adds the little glass pot to her collection. She makes her way downstairs and senses the Djinn there. He's out in the tiny garden with a computer-generated view. The neighbors cartoonishly get into an argument with her about mass immigration and foreigners or something. They are unable to see the Djinn. Alethea is out for the day. I guess it didn't cross her mind to get the Djinn to stop the COVID pandemic. When she gets home to the Djinn, she says how much she missed him. She takes the chickpea and pistachio treats to the next door neighbors and introduces them to the Djinn, saying he will be staying for a while, and both the ladies say hello. One day she gets home and there is a weird dust-like substance in the air. She eventually goes down into the basement and finds Djinn sitting against the wall looking like he's falling to dust. He wakes up and says he was sleeping. She says Djinns don't sleep. Apparently, the problem is the modern world's electromagnetic forces that are interacting with his electromagnetism. She wishes that he returns to where he belongs, wherever that may be. We see her packing a box with his stuff and puts it on a shelf next to her ex-husband's box. 3 years later, Alethea is in a park working on her book about Djinn called 3,000 Years of Longing. As she walks off, she senses something and turns around and sees the Djinn walking towards her. They don't say a word and walk off together, holding hands. She goes on to say that he would visit from time to time and that he promised to visit in her lifetime, and for her, that was enough. Thanks very much for watching this synopsis of 3,000 Years of Longing. I hope that you have enjoyed it. Overall, it is an okay movie that falls short of its potential. It is visually rich, but the story does not do the cinematography justice. If you like the look of it, go for it, but you can probably find something better to offer your time to. Thanks again, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the channel for more synopses. Take care.